UCB Life Issues with Paul Hammond.
And a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Now, on the back of the little book for really, really brilliant grandparents, there's a quote. It says this: "If I'd known grandchildren were so much fun, I'd have had them first." Well, I don't know about that, because I do love my sons, but I do love being a granddad. I've got 2 granddaughters and a grandson, and after a year of not being able to, they're all coming over for a sleepover this weekend. Granddad's famous pancakes may well be on the menu for breakfast. And I know I'm generalising, but that special connection that comes through not being the responsible authority figure, the more relaxed attitude that seems to be able to enjoy the experience of interacting with those children, perhaps even more than we did when we were coping with the stresses of being parents. The life experience that has taught us how quickly little ones really do grow up, and the importance of cherishing each moment comes together to mean being a grandparent is a special thing. And it shouldn't be taken lightly. It's a position that is a privilege. But how do you be the granny and grandad that your children, as well as your grandchildren, need you to be? What can you bring that will leave the next generation richer and better than the last? What is the legacy you can sow into those young and not so young lives that are surrounded by so many pressures, voices, and temptations? Well, in the latest of the Really, Really series, Catherine Hill and Rob Parsons from Care for the Family offer ideas, strategies, practical tips, and the odd bit of wry humour on how to get the most out of and give the most from this vital role within the family. Catherine Hill is an old friend of Life Issues. She's also the UK Director of Care for the Family, a popular speaker, writer and broadcaster. She has practiced as a family lawyer. She regularly speaks on family issues, and she joins me today because, perhaps most important of all, Catherine, you're a granny. Welcome.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you. And I am. I've been a granny for 2 years, but I have a brand new granddaughter this week as well.
Oh, that's lovely. So looking forward to spoiling her rotten as well, no doubt, because I noticed in the book that there was a story about when a grumpy old relative says, "Your granny spoils you," the granddaughter says, "I know she does, and I like it." That's part of the job description, isn't it? What's the best bit of being a granny for you?
Oh, I think the best bit is, well, I think I didn't really understand when other people said it's an amazing privilege to be a grandparent and it's incredible. And I, of course, love my children to bits. But when they were born, I remember each one of them just thinking, help, what do I do? And there was some bit of anxiety of how are you a mum? Whereas with these little ones, I can honestly tell you that second I set eyes on them, I was totally in love and would give my life for them. And that's been amazing. And then they're still only little, but just the fact that we can see them and have fun with them. And then when they start getting grumpy and tired, we can hand them back. That's wonderful.
It is the joy of every grandparent, I think, that you can hand them back at the end of the day. But it is an interesting point, isn't it, that the perspective that changes, because, you know, we live through our own children growing up, the blessings and the struggles of that. And then it is as though the reset when you're dealing with your grandchildren, there's a change in your mindset. It does feel a lot less pressured, a lot less intense in terms of the anxiety that often surrounds parenthood.
I think that's right. Some of that, I think, is the wisdom of just having lived through it all. So right at the moment, I know my little 2-year-old grandson will only eat toast. And I think, do you know, he's probably not going to still just be eating toast when he's 18. But for his mum, that's really stressful because she wants him, you know, to have his 5 a day and eat his broccoli and all the rest. So I think there is something about the perspective that we can bring because we've generally lived through many of the ups and downs of parenting ourselves. but then having the wisdom not to just come in and say it'll all be fine, but actually empathize with them in the moment when things are tough. I think that's one of the secrets.
So tell us a bit about the little book for really, really brilliant grandparents, because I couldn't decide when I started reading it. I couldn't decide whether it was intended to be a book for really, really brilliant grandparents, which was obviously why I was picking up, or whether it was a book to create really, really brilliant grandparents. I suspect a bit of both.
A bit of both. We did struggle with the title. We thought, should it be the really, really busy? No, really, really. Anyway, we decided on the really, really, the little bit for really, really brilliant grandparents. And I think it's just to encourage every grandparent in this really important role, because we're all so different. Some of us may be more the stereotypical grandparents who are, making the apple pies at home and, putting their feet up with a pipe or whatever. Whereas others will probably be, there'll be people running corporations, going to music festivals, or whatever. So many different grandparents, so many different grandchildren, and different shapes and sizes of family. And so we just wanted to give a bit of encouragement and, like you said in your introduction, a few laughs, but some wisdom as well to help us on this journey.
And there are some lovely little one-liners in the book. Things like, our kids can probably survive without our advice, but they desperately need our affirmation. Find things you can praise in your child's parenting. I mean, that is so insightful, because when you were a parent, your, mother-in-law would come along and have an opinion, and it wasn't always well received. And it's important to remember that when you become a grandparent and maybe you're the father-in-law, going along going, oh, you don't want to do it like that, is not necessarily helpful, is it?
No, and it's so hard sometimes to bite your tongue and think, don't pick them up, they'll be fine, or whatever the thing is. But actually, the best thing that we can do, it's a principle of parenting, isn't it? We say all the time, find things that we can praise our children for. The Bible talks about our words having the power of life, and our children as parents need our encouragement. So exactly that, find things we can praise them for, get behind them and affirm them in their parenting. And if they ask for our advice, then there's an amazing opportunity to be able to say, well, I found that this worked for me, but giving that little bit of distance and not just jumping in there, correcting them goes a long way.
It really does. It really. My boys say that they will inscribe on my tombstone the phrase, could I just make a suggestion? So I've stopped saying that now. You talked about the role of grandparents and how important they are. I described it as a vital part of a family life, if that is available to us, because obviously, sadly, for some, it's not. But for a long time, there was a fear that our society was so caught up in celebrating youth that we were losing sight of the value of older members of society. Do you think the role of the grandparent, or that sort of image, do you think that's really valued in society these days? Do you think we've recaptured some of that?
I agree with you that very often we're celebrating youth and trying to turn the clock back. But I do think, particularly in this last year, actually, the role of the grandparent has been recognised more, because we've not been able to see grandchildren. And sometimes when you can't have something, you notice the valuable thing that it is. So, in family life, I think just the wisdom of years and the important part that grandparents can play in giving our children roots and helping them discover their identity and all those things, I think is more recognised now, probably because of this tough year that we've just had.
Well, we're going to explore some of those thoughts and some of those ideas as we go through life issues this week, and we'll come back and revisit some of them. One of the things I did want to talk about, however, was the fact that still in society, the rights of grandparents towards their grandchildren, it's still a bit of a hit and miss thing, that, isn't it? Because theoretically, as a grandparent, you don't have a lot of rights to access or to be involved in your grandchild's life.
Yeah, that's so hard for so many. It's not always, family life is not always plain sailing. And certainly before my role at Care for the Family, I was a family lawyer. And sometimes I would have grandparents come to see me because they weren't able to see their children, their grandchildren. There were really difficult issues that are not straightforward, and they're not always recognized in the legal system. And I know there are organizations that are campaigning for that, but family life is complicated. And I think every family has its ups and downs, but some do have very, very difficult circumstances when they're not able to see grandchildren, or if they are, it's just complicated. So it's really worth recognizing that, I think.
And in recognizing that, and perhaps as a community, and perhaps particularly as a faith community, we need to recognize that where that's happening, there is a phenomenal emotional wrench tied up with that, and where that's going on around us, we need to be supportive of people.
Yeah, I think for grandparents unable to see grandchildren, it's incredibly hard. If there's, family breakdown, sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's simply across the miles that they're a long, long way away and they haven't been able to actually see them. Although I'm sure we'll get onto this when we're chatting, but with technology now, they can, but we know it's not the same as being in the same room. But then on the other hand, it is tough for the little ones and the older ones, the teenagers, not being able to see grandparents. So I never knew my grandparents, and my parents were wise, actually, and they had people from that older generation that they would invite round to our home on occasions. So they were like grandparent figures, really. And that was a wonderful thing to do. So I do think as a church, as faith communities, we can be standing in the shoes of that generation for those families that don't have that, because it is so important.
Yes, I too had surrogate grannies and granddads when I was growing up, because my grandparents were at the opposite end of the country and there was no tinternet and travel wasn't that easy either. You used to take hours in the car to get to Scotland. And so there were people within our faith community, within our church, who I look back now and I realise that they perform that role for me, and I realised that subsequently there were people in our churches that performed that role for my children as well, and recognising and valuing that is an important element of this as well. Well, the book is called The Little Book for Really, Really Brilliant Grandparents. It's by Rob Parsons and Catherine Hill from Care for the Family, of course, and it is available through the Care for the Family website. We're going to unpick and unpack some of the ideas for this week's Life Issues, and let's start with that thought about the fact that there are all kinds of grandparents, and very often these days grandparents are working for a lot longer than they might have been when we were nippers.
Absolutely. I think there are grandparents that are at home and they're retired maybe, and they have time to connect and to see grandchildren. But then there are many that are working full-time, part-time, many that are caring for grandchildren, sometimes to enable parents to work part-time, so maybe just one day a week, few hours a day. But there are other grandparents that are virtually full-time caring for grandchildren as well. And so huge variety, different sort of pressures, I think, on grandparents. So some may be looking after their own parents as well as grandchildren. So spanning, all those generations, not just, it's a triple sandwich generation almost, isn't it? So looking after, your children, your grandchildren, but also your parents as well. And that can actually lead to very busy lives and quite a lot of pressures in terms of time, emotionally, financially, spiritually, whole load of stuff going on there. So it's worth recognizing that, I think.
And it's important, isn't it? Because I think there's a natural inclination to go as a grandparent, you want to spend time with your grandchildren. I love it when my grandchildren come for a sleepover. I love it when we make the batter for the pancakes the night before, and then we get up early, often before Granny gets up, because she's going, seriously, have you seen the time? It's 5 o'clock in the morning. No, you shouldn't be making pancakes at this time. But, you know, we don't mind. But when we do that sort of stuff, it is an incredible thrill. But there needs to be a recognition, doesn't there, across family, that you can't put too much of that pressure onto grandparents, that there has to be a balance found, and the responsibility for parents to see that, but also for grandparents to sometimes say no. It's very real.
And it's hard to say no because we want our kids to thrive. We feel guilty, but it is okay. It is okay to say no and to put some boundaries in place. But it can be hard. But I think if we communicate with our children, we don't just either of us assume what's going to happen, and then put some good boundaries and guidelines in place, and to try and work at that relationship. So it's about those unsaid expectations and assumptions. And if we can have those conversations up front about care and childcare and what that looks like, then I think that can really help us moving forward.
Because there's the danger, isn't there? And this applies to a whole range of relationships, and also to the relationship between grandparent and grandchild. But if you have the conversations where you talk about the things and perhaps say, there will be times when I need to say no. It's not that I don't want to be involved. It's not that I don't care about your situation. If I can, I will. But there will be times I will need to say no. Creating that understanding almost intentionally from the outset. I mean, you know, not perhaps the day after the baby's born, but creating that understanding. We do have to be intentional about that. It's not just going to happen by osmosis, is it?
No, it's really important. And I think the earlier we can have those conversations, the better. Probably there's going to be a bit of time after a baby's born before a parent goes back to work. And so just, having those conversations early on, agreeing expectations, and where possible, laying down the guilt is, that's the way to go.
Absolutely essential. And what about the whole thing of the distance? And because you mentioned before, technology has been, incredible boon during the pandemic. But how well does that enable the building of a relationship between grandparent and grandchild?
Well, I think we have learnt so much in the last year. If we'd been having this conversation a year ago, I'd have said, it's just not as good and you can't really connect. And many grandparents maybe aren't as sort of whizzy on technology as they'd like to be. But I think all that has changed. And of course, it's not the same as face-to-face. And children get bored. They're not going to want to sit in front of a screen for hours on end. They're going to be jumping on the sofa and doing handstands or whatever. But nevertheless, I think that ability to see each other on a screen over this last year, to have a bit of a conversation, maybe to read a story, maybe to tell a joke, maybe to show them that you're making biscuits or pancakes or whatever it is, I think that's built connections there. So it's been a good thing. Of course, it's not the same as being in the same room, but for grandparents that are many, many miles away where that's not possible, I think it's enabled connection to be made in a way that probably we wouldn't have believed a year ago. And
I suppose you do have to manage as the adult, you have to manage your expectations, don't you? Because as you say, they're not going to just sit and stare at a screen and talk to you for hours. And let's be honest, very few of us want to sit and stare at a screen. So managing expectations, creating perhaps that event feel to what you're doing, that is key. Planning it, thinking it through, that is key.
Yeah, and I've heard of a lot of grandparents reading stories to grandchildren. That's lovely. Asking them about their day, about what the things that they're interested in, and make it, and not feeling it. You have to flog it to death, but just little and often is really good. There's a lovely story in the grandparent book that we've written about a grandmother that knitted this blanket, and she actually knitted two almost like gloves that were in it. So this little girl could put the blanket on and put her hands inside the gloves. And in the book it says, when a little girl was going to sleep in Sydney, Australia, and the grandmother was actually in Scotland, this little girl felt that the grandmother was hugging her.
Yeah.
That was really sweet.
And it is things like that. We might think that, as adults, we might be inclined to think, oh, it's a bit cheesy, or that's a bit sort of, that's not really going to make a difference on. But actually, especially in younger children's lives, if you start that sort of connection and that sort of effort for connection, then when they're teenagers and actually all they want to do is play on a video game, that connection carries a message to them that stays with them. You're investing for the long term in this, aren't you?
You are. And obviously we've just been talking about technology, and that's really important. But little ones particularly love receiving a real live letter, a postcard with their name on it that they can open and treasure and put by their bed. So it's finding those different ways of making those connections. And you are right, if we put the effort in when they're little, it's never too late, but if we put the effort in when they're little, we'll have that relationship with them when they are teenagers. And maybe we then need to be interested in their Minecraft or whatever game they're playing at the moment. But being interested in those things is what helps us to connect with them, and for them to value and want that relationship as well.
And for them to see that we are interested in them because we are interested in their things. There's a lovely quote in the book. The book is called, as I mentioned earlier, The Little Book for Really, Really Brilliant Grandparents. Lovely quote in it. It says this: "My grandchild has taught me what true love means. It means watching Peppa Pig while Arsenal versus Liverpool is on the other channel." You're listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond. My guest this week is Catherine Hill, who, along with Rob Parsons, both of them, of course, from Care for the Family. Catherine is the UK director, and they have written in their Really, Really series, the latest one is called The Little Book for Really, Really Brilliant Grandparents. It is a very special relationship, isn't it? The grandparent-grandchild relationship. The parental relationship is really, really important. But throughout generation after generation, it has been identified that there is a connection can be made that skips that parent generation. And it is an incredibly precious. What is it that's special about that relationship?
Well, psychologists call it an uncomplicated form of love. It's emotionally uncomplicated because we've got all the love and we've got the investment, but actually at the end of the day, unless we are caring full-time for our grandchildren, we don't have that ultimate responsibility. And so we don't have to worry about whether they've done their music practice or learnt their spellings or eating their broccoli or whatever it is. The other day, one of my grandchildren was here and didn't want their main course, and I gave them 2 puddings. And I thought, I would never have done that with my children. They would have been, nope, if you don't eat your cottage pie, then no pudding for you.
Absolutely.
And as I was doing it, I thought, oh gosh, this is different. But I think, yes, I think that psychologist captured that well, an uncomplicated form of love. And we have time sometimes to invest in them, to read the story without skipping the pages, to gently untangle hair after swimming or whatever, because we haven't got the rest of life and other children all crashing around us and those other responsibilities. So there is something very special about it.
You, I think, reference it. Now, I can't remember if this was in some of the publicity around the book or whether it was in the book itself, or indeed something perhaps you've said to me in the past. But there is, and we talk in faith terms, we often talk about unconditional love. And there is an element of that. I mean, is it fair to say that in that uncomplicated, simplistic, servant heart giving attitude of love that grandparents seem to be able to encapsulate, that there is an echo of God's love for us.
I think there is. I mean, we don't want to just paint a totally rosy picture, because some grandparents do have a really, really difficult time. So, but acknowledging that. But I think, yeah, the love for our children, we want to get to that place of unconditional love and of acceptance. But sometimes that's hard. But as a grandparent, somehow there are less things in the way of that. And I think if we can be showing them total acceptance, whatever they do, however they mess up, whatever things are going on, and we accept not necessarily what they've done, but who they are, and we show them that unconditional love, that will be helping them discover their God-given identity, because that we're reflecting the love that their Heavenly Father has for them as well. And that's an incredible privilege to be able to be part of that.
Part of that is also about giving a sense of context, isn't it, within family, that older generation, and whether it be grandparents or even great-grandparents, that there is for a child, there is a sense of knowing where they have come from, where they are perhaps going, what the context of their life, how that is framed. And I suppose as well, a place where they can run to when they need to hide, a port in the storm.
Yes. I mean, there's so much in that. I was just, when you were speaking, remembering a lovely thing that happened actually when our own children were little. And one of them was going to stay with his little friend and his friend's grandparents for a couple of nights at half term, which was very exciting. And we had a rendezvous at a service station to hand these children over. And the grandfather kindly bought them a McDonald's. And these boys were very excited at the Happy Meal or whatever it was. But on the side of the box, there were lots and lots of amazing facts about space and how many billion stars there were and how many light years away and all that sort of thing. And this grandfather, I'll never forget it, he said, "Wow, boys." And he started reading out the facts. And then he said, "And you know, in the Bible, there's a little verse and it just says this, and he also made the stars." Isn't that amazing? Now, how are those chips? And it was just a perfect example of just rooting those children in something incredible in the everyday things of life as a grandfather. So we have a key role, I think, in that. And as we help our children discover their identity, and it's giving them roots, so we can tell them the stories of our family, the unvarnished stories, maybe the good and the bad, but help them discover where they've come from, where they fit in, introducing them to wider family. Our little grandchildren love looking at photographs. So we've got a sort of array of photographs in frames on a table. And when they come in, they always want to go and try and find mummy and daddy on their wedding day and that sort of thing. Because I think there's a natural curiosity that we have to know that framework really for our lives.
And to see their place within it. So to see their photographs added to that family display as well. However, Mrs. Hill, I just wanted to draw you up on one small thing. Because there is the suggestion in this book that Granny should tell her grandchildren where she first kissed Grandad and stories like that. I mean, do we want to be unpacking those sorts of things for our grandchildren?
I think, well, maybe not that can be a family secret, but I do think they love to know that sort of thing. They love to know where we met. I remember Rob Parsons talking about going up into the loft with his grandchildren and found some of the cards, sort of Valentine cards that Diane, his wife, had sent to him in the early days, and his children just love it. Grandchildren just loving those. So I think any stories that provide context help give them security.
And I suppose there are messages in that, aren't there? And as you've correctly said, I mean, there are a variety of circumstances that families and that parents and that grandparents find themselves in. And it's not always that everything in the garden is rosy. And we do recognise that. But where there is a strong, established, stable relationship between Granny and Grandad, actually revealing some of those Valentine's cards or the little country lane where that first kiss took place and going to those places even and visiting those homes from generation to generation, it does actually instill values in our grandchildren as well as our children.
Yeah, it's a sense of history. And I think if people are grandparenting alone, there's so much as well that has gone into their story. And so, yeah, just including that in our grandchildren's lives. So it's almost like the jigsaw puzzle of sort of making up bits of where they came from, where they fit in. And there's one little phrase we've included in the book, and it says, when an old person dies, it's often said that the library burns down. And then we say, but it shouldn't burn down, because we can record all the things of our own lives and tell our children about them and show them the photographs. And that really, really is important in helping them establish who they are in the world.
You're listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond. We are musing today around the role of grandparent and what it means to be a grandparent and how the role of grandparent can actually establish a legacy in a grandchild that will set them up for their entire lives. It might not be a thing of wealth and riches, but it can be a richness of understanding who they are, where they are, that there's a port in the storm, that there is always somewhere they can go, even when they fall out with mom and dad. Let's be honest, we all fell out with mom and dad, didn't we? But there's also an incredible joy, Catherine, in hearing your children do the things that you did. There's a quote in the book, and it says, I stopped outside our grandson's door at bedtime and heard his mummy saying the same little prayer I used to say with her every night when she was a child. And I've had similar experience hearing my sons tell my grandchildren stories and recognize the strange and weird and sometimes not so wonderful accents that they would use and the intonation that they would use and the way that they would deliver it and just be transported back to when they were tots. And there is a deep joy in that sense that you are passing on from generation to generation.
Memories and traditions, they are so key. And as grandparents, we can pass those on. So in our family, we had a thing with our children when we would take one of them out to breakfast, to Tesco's generally on a Saturday morning. And that just became the thing that we did. And I was smiling when I heard my son the other day talking about taking his little girl off out to breakfast on a Saturday morning, because it's just part of our family tradition, and every family will have those, whether it's things like that we do, particular things on a Friday night, words we use for things, your pancakes for breakfast, whatever it is. And it passing on those traditions and memories. And as a grandparent, it's a delight to see it when we see our children doing that. And it's also super annoying when you see them giving advice and saying things to their children that you've said to them that you think has fallen on deaf ears, but actually probably it has sunk in somewhere along the way.
Indeed. And passing on values is important as well, because just in our final moments, one of the things I wanted to consider is what it brings for our children to have a good granny and granddad around. And one of those things has to be another voice to back up those values, those principles, those reassurances, so that my little granddaughter knows that she is valuable as a person, that she doesn't need someone to validate her. We do that whole Disney princess thing where really you don't need a Prince Charming to rescue you. You can be you and should be you and all that sort of stuff. Those sorts of messages, to have a second set of voices reaffirming them is important.
Especially, I think, in the teenage years, where sometimes our children may not want to be listening to their parents, because the teenage years are where they're meant to be establishing their identity away from us. And to be able to have that relationship with a grandparent, so when they've been the butt of a joke on social media, or they've been left out of the team, or whatever hard thing has come their way, to be able to come to a grandparent and to talk to them. And also when there's difficulties at home, if there is difficulty in their parents' relationship, whatever else is happening, if there's been a separation, whatever, just again, to be able to come back, that I think you called it a port in a storm. And I think that's the sort of harbour is what the grandparent can provide.
I'd like to take you back to something you alluded to earlier on. And once again, there is a quote in the book. There's a section in the book. And let me just remind you, the book is called The Little Book for Really, Really Brilliant Grandparents. It's published by Muddy Pearl, and it is available through the Care for the Family website, which is cff.org.uk. That's cff.org.uk. But this quote says this, Catherine: if we are wise as grandparents, we will hold our advice, brilliant though we're sure it is, until that defining moment when it will be welcomed. In other words, when we are asked for it. And that's perhaps the key thing to remember as a grandparent, isn't it? That it's not only a privilege to be a grandparent, but it's also a privilege we are afforded to be a grandparent in how we relate to our grandchildren.
Yeah, it is such a privilege. And I think we move in our role from being the team coach, if you like, where we're in there for our children, giving advice. And inevitably in the teenage years, we step back from that. And then when we become grandparents, we step back even more. And I think in the book, we talk about us being the cheerleaders. We're the ones that are cheering them on. And that's the most important thing that we can do, grasping those moments to have fun and to build that connection and to cheer our grandchildren as well as our children on in this incredible task of bringing them up.
So a final thought from you then. Were you to sum it up with just 3 sentences, what would be your sentence for grandchildren? What would be your sentence for parents? And what would be your sentence for Granny and Grandad?
Yeah, so my sentence for grandchildren, I think, would be make the most of the time you have with your grandparents, to have fun with them, but most of all, to learn from them. For parents, in the context of the grandparenting relationship, is know that your parents are there for you. Even if they get it wrong, their best intention is to cheer you on. They want to see you succeed. And
what would you say? Well, what would you say to you and me? What would you say to the grannies and the granddads?
Have fun and enjoy it.
Absolutely. You'll get no argument from me. And if you would like to pick up on some of the tips and some of the hints and some of the sage advice that is there from our friends at Care for the Family, well, The Little Book for Really, Really Brilliant Grandparents is published by Muddy Pearl and is available in various places, but especially through cff.org.uk, cff.org.uk. That's the Care for the Family website. I started this by saying I love being a granddad, and I do. But the greatest thrill, the greatest privilege of being a grandparent is to see your children blossom as parents and your grandchildren grow into the people that God wants them to be. And so, as grandparents, perhaps the most important thing we need to learn to do is to be the cheerleaders and to pray for those who come behind us, that we might leave with them a legacy that will enable them one day to be really, really brilliant grandparents too. Catherine Hill is from Care for the Family. It's always a pleasure, Catherine. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. It's been great to be with you. Thanks.
You've been listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond. Don't forget you can download this as a podcast wherever you download yours. And why not join me next week for another Life Issues? Good night.